The Alpha King found his enemy's bride, abandoned in the cold, and made a choice no one expected. Prologue. They say the worst cold isn't the one that freezes your body, it's the one that freezes your heart. Octavia learned this truth on what should have been her wedding night, when Marcus looked at her with those indifferent gray eyes and spoke words that shattered everything. "I'll fulfill the binding ceremony because our families demand it, but don't expect more than duty. My heart belongs to another, and it always will." Then he left her standing there in the ceremony hall, alone in her wedding dress, surrounded by witnesses who pretended not to hear. Left her to walk back to the guest quarters in silence, shame burning hotter than any flame. Left her feeling like a decoration no one wanted to keep after the celebration ended. She wasn't enough, had never been enough, and now she would spend her life as a shadow in his home, watching him love someone else while she played the role of convenient arrangement. That's when Octavia made her choice. She walked out of that hall still wearing white silk and kept walking. Through the compound, past the gates, into the winter forest where the storm had been building all evening. Not to die, but to disappear. To become as invisible on the outside as she'd always felt on the inside. The cold embraced her like the only honest thing left in the world. And when her legs finally gave out and she sank into the snow, Octavia felt a strange peace. At least here, alone, she didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't know that someone was searching the forest that night. Someone who would find her curled beneath the trees, dress frozen stiff, lips blue, barely breathing. She didn't know that the Alpha King of the Northern Territories would take one look at her and speak an oath that would bind their fates forever. And she definitely couldn't have imagined what he would say when his advisors questioned why he'd invoked ancient protection for a stranger. "Because no one gets left in the cold, not while I have breath to carry them home." If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. We post videos every single day, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. Chapter 1. The cold was a living thing. That was Octavia's first coherent thought as consciousness slowly, painfully returned. Not the sharp, biting cold of wind against skin, but a deep, bone-settling cold that suggested her body had been losing the battle against winter for quite some time. She tried to open her eyes and found her lashes frozen together, tried to move her fingers and discovered they wouldn't respond to her commands. Her entire body felt distant, disconnected, as if she were a spirit hovering just outside her own flesh, watching it fail from a safe remove. But then, warmth began seeping in. Gradual, careful warmth that didn't burn but coaxed, invited, gently reminded her body what it felt like to be alive. Octavia forced her eyes open. Slowly, because her lashes resisted, stuck together with ice that melted reluctantly under the heat surrounding her. The first thing she saw was fire. Orange and gold flames dancing in a massive stone hearth, their light painting shadows across dark wooden beams overhead. Not the forest, then. Not the snow where she'd finally given up and let herself sink into merciful numbness. She was inside, in a bed, an impossibly soft bed with blankets piled so high she could barely see over them. And warm. So wonderfully, miraculously warm that for a moment, Octavia simply lay there, absorbing the sensation, remembering what it felt like to not hurt from cold. "You're awake," the voice came from her left, deep and smooth as aged whiskey, and Octavia's heart jumped into her throat. She turned her head, slowly because everything still felt sluggish and uncooperative, and found him. An alpha sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, and even seated, even at rest, his presence filled the room in a way that made the generous space feel suddenly intimate. He was large, she could tell that much. Broad shoulders that strained against the simple dark shirt he wore, arms that suggested strength without needing to demonstrate it. His face was angular and striking, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, and eyes that caught the firelight and reflected it back in shades of ice blue. Those eyes were watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. "Where?" Octavia's voice came out as barely more than a croak, her throat raw and painful. She swallowed and tried again. "Where am I?" "Frost Peak Castle," the Alpha said, his voice measured and calm, as if he understood that too much information at once might overwhelm her. "In the Northern Highlands. You're safe here." Frost Peak. The name resonated through Octavia's foggy mind, pulling up half-remembered stories and whispered legends. Frost Peak was the seat of power for the most influential pack in the Northern Territories, ruled by an Alpha King whose reputation for both strength and unexpected mercy had spread throughout the regions, which meant the man watching her with such careful attention was, "You're the Alpha King," Octavia said, and it wasn't a question. Recognition settled over her like another blanket, heavier than the physical ones, weighted with implications she wasn't ready to examine. "Joel," he corrected gently, "and you are Octavia of Silver Creek, recently intended maid of Marcus Shadowfang." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ice-blue eyes, though I understand that arrangement ended somewhat abruptly. Shame flooded through Octavia, hot and acidic, chasing away some of the lingering cold. Of course he knew. Everyone would know by now. News of her humiliation, of Marcus's public rejection, of her desperate flight into the storm, would have spread through the territories like wildfire. "I didn't mean to trespass on your lands," Octavia said, trying to push herself up to sitting and discovering that her arms were about as useful as wet cloth. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I just needed to get away, and I kept walking until you collapsed in my forest, half frozen and barely conscious," Joel finished. He stood then, moving with fluid grace to pour water from a pitcher into a cup, which, for the record, is not trespassing in any legal sense. These lands are open to any wolf in genuine need. He approached the bed, and Octavia's instincts, trained through years of navigating pack hierarchy, told her to lower her eyes, to show submission to an alpha of such obvious power. But when she tried, when she dropped her gaze respectfully, Joel made a soft sound of negation. "Look at me," he said, and it wasn't a command so much as a request. "Please, I need you to understand something important." Octavia lifted her eyes back to his face and found him watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. Serious, certainly, intent, but also concerned? "You are under my protection now," Joel said, each word deliberate and weighted. "I invoked an ancient rite called the Sacred Refuge when I found you." "Do you know what that means?" Octavia searched her memory for any mention of such a thing, and came up empty. She shook her head. Joel set the water cup on the table beside the bed, within her reach if she could manage to grasp it. The Sacred Refuge is an old law, one that predates most of the modern pack structures. It states that an alpha of royal bloodline may claim protection over any wolf found in mortal danger within their territory. Once invoked, that protection is absolute and lasts for one full lunar cycle, 28 days. He moved back slightly, giving her space, and Octavia appreciated the gesture even as her mind raced to process what he was saying. "During those 28 days," Joel continued, "you are under my direct care and authority. No other alpha can claim you, command you, or make demands of you. You answer only to me, and I am bound by the right to ensure your safety and well-being." "And after 28 days?" Octavia asked, her voice still rough but growing stronger. "After 28 days, you make a choice." Joel's expression softened slightly. "You can accept a permanent place in my pack, not as a subordinate, but as a valued member with full rights and protections. Or you can leave with my blessing and enough resources to start fresh wherever you choose. The decision is entirely yours." It sounded too good to be true. Octavia had learned young that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. There was always a price, always an expectation hidden beneath the pretty promises. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would you do this for a stranger? For someone who brings nothing but complications and the anger of the Shadowfang pack?" Joel was quiet for a long moment, and Octavia watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify. Finally, he moved back to his chair and sat, as if he needed the distance to answer honestly. 3 nights ago, he began, his voice taking on a reflective quality. I couldn't sleep. I often walk the forest when my mind is too loud for rest. And that night, the storm was building. I should have returned to the castle, but something kept pulling me deeper into the trees. Not a sound or a scent, just an inexplicable certainty that I needed to keep searching. He looked at her, and in the firelight, his eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. I found you curled beneath a pine tree, your wedding dress frozen stiff, your lips blue, barely breathing, Joel continued. And when I touched you, when I felt how cold you were, something inside me woke up. My wolf, the instinctive part of me that usually only cares about territory and hierarchy, looked at you and said one word, mine. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Octavia's breath catch. Not mine to own, Joel clarified quickly, as if reading her sudden tension. Mine to protect, mine to keep safe, mine to ensure never feels that kind of desperation again. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving hers. I don't expect you to understand it. I barely understand it myself. But I couldn't leave you there, Octavia. And simply bringing you back and sending you on your way once you healed felt wrong. Incomplete. Octavia didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the idea that this powerful Alpha King had felt some instinctive connection to her. A nobody from a minor pack. Rejected and abandoned. Worth nothing in the eyes of those who should have valued her. I won't hurt you, Joel added softly. I won't force you into anything you don't want. The Sacred Refuge is exactly what it sounds like. A refuge. A safe place to heal. To rest. To figure out what you want from your life without anyone else's expectations pressing down on you. He stood again, moving toward the door, and Octavia felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. A healer will come check on you soon, Joel said, his hand on the door handle. And I've assigned an attendant named Mira to help with anything you need. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. Joel, Octavia called out before he could leave, surprising herself with her own boldness. He paused, looking back at her with a raised eyebrow. Thank you, she said simply, for not leaving me in the snow. For this. Something warm entered his expression, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, more approachable. You're welcome, Octavia, he said. And for what it's worth, I'm glad I found you. Gladder than I can adequately express. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Octavia was alone with her thoughts and the persistent warmth of a fire that someone had carefully tended to keep her alive. She looked down at herself, really looked for the first time, and discovered she was wearing a soft nightgown that was clearly too large for her, meant for someone with broader shoulders and longer limbs. It smelled like pine and winter air and something else, something indefinable but comforting. It smelled like Joel. Octavia's cheeks flushed as she realized he must have been the one to change her out of the frozen wedding dress, to wrap her in dry clothes and pile blankets over her cooling body. He had seen her at her absolute lowest, vulnerable and helpless, and instead of taking advantage, he had protected her. The wedding dress. Octavia's heart clenched as she thought about it. That beautiful, expensive gown that her family had scrimped and saved to afford, that she'd put on with trembling hands while her mother wept with joy at the match her daughter had secured. All for nothing. All for a ceremony that ended in humiliation and desperate flight. Tears burned at the back of Octavia's eyes, and she blinked them away furiously. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not when she'd been given this unexpected gift of 28 days to rebuild herself. 28 days to figure out who Octavia was when she wasn't trying to be perfect enough for someone who would never value her. 28 days to heal. And maybe, if the way her heart had jumped when Joel looked at her was any indication, 28 days to discover something entirely unexpected. Chapter 2. The healer arrived an hour after Joel left. A kindly older woman named Thora, who checked Octavia's extremities with gentle, efficient hands. No frostbite, thank the moon, Thora said, her voice carrying the particular mix of briskness and warmth that seemed common to healers everywhere. Your feet and fingers are bruised and tender, but the tissue is healthy. You'll be sore for several days, but there should be no permanent damage. She produced a tin of salve that smelled sharply of mint and something else Octavia couldn't identify, and carefully massaged it into Octavia's aching feet. The sensation was initially uncomfortable. Bringing full feeling back to numbed extremities was never pleasant, but gradually became soothing. His Majesty brought you in just in time, Thora continued as she worked. Another hour in that cold, maybe less, and we'd be having a very different conversation. You're lucky he has insomnia and a habit of wandering the forest at odd hours. Is that common? Octavia asked. The wandering, I mean. Thora's hands paused briefly before resuming their work. More common than it should be for a wolf his age. The young king carries heavy burdens, and they weigh on him especially at night when he can't distract himself with the day's duties. There was affection in the healer's voice, the kind that spoke of long acquaintance and genuine care. It made Octavia wonder about Joel's life here, about what it meant to be an alpha king, responsible for thousands of wolves, with no one to share that weight with. He spoke of the Sacred Refuge, Octavia said carefully, not sure how much Thora would know or how much she should reveal. Is that truly as absolute as he claims? Thora looked up from her work, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. You doubt his word? No, Octavia said quickly. No, I want to understand what I've gotten myself into, or what he's gotten himself into by protecting me. The healer's expression softened. The Sacred Refuge is indeed absolute, child. I've only seen it invoked twice in my 60 years, both times for warriors grievously wounded in defense of the pack. Never for— She paused, choosing her words carefully. Never for a wolf unconnected to Frost Peak. It's caused quite a stir among the council, I can tell you that much. Octavia's stomach sank. They disapprove? They question, Thora corrected, which is their job. But questioning and disapproving are different things. Most of the council trusts King Joel's judgment, even when they don't immediately understand his reasoning. She finished with the salve and began bandaging Octavia's feet with soft cloth. And between you and me, I think some of them are simply glad to see him taking an interest in something beyond duty for once. Before Octavia could ask what that meant, a knock sounded at the door. That'll be Mira, Thora said, rising and moving to answer. Your attendant. She's young but capable, and more importantly, she has a good heart. She'll take excellent care of you. The young woman who entered was perhaps 20, with dark hair braided back from a friendly face, and warm brown eyes that immediately found Octavia and lit with curiosity. Oh, good, you're awake, Mira said, her enthusiasm infectious. I've been waiting all morning to meet you. Well, not waiting in a creepy way, His Majesty said you were important and to make sure you had everything you needed, so I wanted to be ready when you— She cut herself off with a self-deprecating laugh. I'm babbling. Sorry. I do that when I'm nervous. Despite everything, Octavia found herself smiling. It's nice to meet you, Mira. And you. Mira bounced slightly on her toes, her energy a stark contrast to Octavia's exhaustion. I've prepared fresh clothes for you. Nothing fancy, just comfortable things until we know what you like. And there's food being sent up. And oh, His Majesty said to tell you that you're free to explore the castle once you're feeling stronger. Anywhere you want to go. Well, almost anywhere. The council chambers are probably off limits during meetings, but otherwise, anywhere. Thora chuckled, patting Mira's shoulder as she moved toward the door. Try to let the poor girl rest, Mira. She's been through an ordeal. Right, yes, rest, of course, Mira said, visibly trying to contain her enthusiasm. Then, more quietly, but if you need anything at all, I'm right down the hall. Literally anything. Even if it's just company. I'm told I'm very good company. After Thora left and Mira helped her into fresh clothes, soft leggings and a tunic that actually fit, unlike the nightgown, Octavia found herself sitting up properly for the first time, eating soup that Mira had brought from the kitchens. Everyone's talking about you, Mira said cheerfully, settling into the chair Joel had occupied earlier. "About how His Majesty carried you through the storm himself. Wouldn't let anyone else touch you. About how he invoked the Sacred Refuge right there in the forest with half the night guard as witnesses. Very dramatic. Very romantic." Octavia nearly choked on her soup. "It wasn't romantic. I was dying." "Well, yes, obviously dying isn't romantic," Mira agreed. "But the rescue? The powerful Alpha King finding his—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening. "I mean, finding someone. A person who needed help, which he gave, very helpfully." "What were you going to say?" Octavia asked, setting down her spoon. "Finding his what?" Mira shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing, just pack gossip. You know how it is." "I don't, actually," Octavia said. "My pack never gossiped about me. I wasn't interesting enough to warrant it." Something sad flickered across Mira's face. "Well, you're interesting now, and people are saying—" She trailed off, clearly debating with herself. Finally, she leaned forward conspiratorially. "They're saying you might be his true mate, that the Sacred Refuge was just an excuse to bring you here without causing a scandal." True mate. The word sent a jolt through Octavia's chest. True mates were rare, legendary even. Two wolves whose souls were crafted by the moon herself to fit together perfectly. Most wolves never found theirs, settling instead for chosen mates or remaining alone. "That's ridiculous," Octavia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We've barely exchanged a dozen words. True mate bonds don't need words," Mira said wisely. "They need recognition. And from what the guards are saying, His Majesty recognized something the moment he touched you." Octavia's mind flashed back to Joel's words. "My wolf looked at you and said one word. Mine." No. She couldn't let herself think like that. Couldn't let herself hope for something so impossibly perfect when her life had just taught her the hardest lesson about the danger of hope. "It doesn't matter what people are saying," Octavia said firmly. "I'm here for 28 days to recover and figure out my next steps, that's all." Mira looked like she wanted to argue, but wisely held her tongue. Instead, she stood and moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains to let afternoon sunlight stream into the room. "Would you like to see the view?" she asked. "It's really beautiful from this tower." Octavia's feet still ached, but curiosity won out over discomfort. With Mira's help, she made her way slowly to the window and gasped at what she saw. The castle sat high on a hillside, offering sweeping views of the territory below. Rolling forests blanketed in snow stretched as far as she could see, broken only by a distant settlement where smoke rose from countless chimneys. Mountains ringed the horizon, their peaks sharp against a brilliant blue sky. And everywhere, was pristine white snow that sparkled in the sunlight like scattered diamonds. It was breathtaking, wild and beautiful and vast in a way that made Octavia's chest ache with something she couldn't name. "Welcome to Frost Peak," Mira said softly. "You're home for the next month." Home. The word resonated strangely. Octavia had spent her whole life in Silver Creek, but she'd never really felt at home there. Always a little apart, a little different, never quite fitting into the space the pack had carved for her. Could this place, this wild, beautiful, overwhelming place, possibly feel like home in just 28 days? Looking out at the endless snow and feeling warmth seeping into her bones from the fire behind her, Octavia thought maybe, just maybe, it could. Chapter 3. 2 days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze before Octavia felt strong enough to truly leave her room. 2 days of sleeping more deeply than she had in years, waking to find sunlight streaming through the windows and fresh meals waiting on the table beside her bed. 2 days of Mira's cheerful company, bringing books from the library and news from the castle. Carefully edited, Octavia suspected, to avoid anything that might distress a recovering guest. 2 days of Thora's visits, checking her healing extremities and pronouncing her progress satisfactory. And 2 days without seeing Joel again. Octavia told herself it was better this way. That she needed space to process everything that had happened, needed time to rebuild her strength without the complication of those ice-blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her feel seen in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. But late at night, when the fire burned low and the castle grew quiet, she found herself wondering where he was. If he was walking the forests again, unable to sleep, carrying whatever burdens kept him restless, if he thought about her at all, or if saving dying wolves was simply another duty he'd performed and moved on from. On the third morning, Octavia woke with determination replacing the fog that had clouded her thoughts since arriving. She was tired of being an invalid, tired of staying confined to one room no matter how beautiful it was. Her feet no longer ached with every step, and the pervasive cold that had settled into her bones had finally released its grip. When Mira arrived with breakfast, she found Octavia already dressed in the simple gray dress and soft boots that had been provided, attempting to braid her own hair with limited success. "You're up," Mira said, delight spreading across her face. "And dressed. Does this mean you're ready to explore?" "If I'm allowed," Octavia said, giving up on the braid and letting her dark hair fall loose around her shoulders. "I feel like I might go mad if I stare at these four walls for another day." "Oh, you're absolutely allowed," Mira assured her. "His Majesty left explicit instructions that you were to have free run of the castle once you felt well enough. Well, almost free run. The council chambers are off limits during official meetings, and the king's private study is, well, private. But everything else? Yours to explore." The phrase, "His Majesty left explicit instructions," sent an unexpected flutter through Octavia's stomach. So Joel had been thinking about her, planning for her recovery, even if he hadn't visited again. "Where should we start?" Octavia asked, trying to sound casual despite the sudden nervousness making her hands tremble slightly. Mira's eyes lit with barely contained excitement. "Oh, I have the perfect place. Come on." She led Octavia out of the room and down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever, lined with windows on one side that offered stunning views of the snow-covered landscape beyond the castle walls. Morning light poured through the glass, painting everything in shades of gold and white, and Octavia found herself pausing every few steps just to look. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mira said, noticing Octavia's fascination. "I grew up here. My mother was a weaver in the settlement, and when she died, His Majesty's father gave me a position in the castle. I was only 12 then. I've seen this view every day for the past 8 years, and it still takes my breath away sometimes." There was something in the way Mira spoke about the late king, something warm and grateful, that made Octavia curious. What was he like? Joel's father? King Aldrich? Mira's expression grew wistful. Kind. Firm when he needed to be, but never cruel. He ruled with the belief that a pack's strength came from the well-being of all its members, not just the powerful ones. She glanced at Octavia. His Majesty is very much his father's son in that regard. Maybe even more so. They descended a grand staircase, the banister carved with intricate designs of wolves and moons and forests, each detail so precise it must have taken master craftsmen years to complete. At the bottom, Mira turned left, leading Octavia through an arched doorway into a room that made her stop in her tracks. The library was magnificent. It stretched 3 stories high, with bookshelves climbing the walls all the way to a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. Rolling ladders provided access to the upper levels, and scattered throughout the space were comfortable reading areas, chairs by windows, cushioned benches tucked into alcoves, even a few low tables surrounded by floor cushions for those who preferred to sit closer to the ground. But what captured Octavia's attention most was the sheer number of books. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, their spines showing every color imaginable, some clearly ancient and precious, others newer and well-worn from frequent reading. "This is..." Octavia breathed, moving slowly into the room as if afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the spell. "This is incredible. I thought you might like it," Mira said with obvious pleasure. "His Majesty spends a lot of time here when he's not attending to pack business. Says books are better company than most courtiers." Octavia ran her fingers along the spines of the nearest shelf, reading titles at random, History, philosophy, poetry, legends of the old times before packs organized themselves into territories. There were even a few children's stories, their bright covers standing out among the more serious tomes. "You're welcome to read anything you like," Mira continued. His Majesty was very clear about that. He said— She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. He said that a person's choice of reading material tells you more about them than a dozen formal conversations. The idea that Joel wanted to know her, truly know her beyond the surface details of her name and pack, sent warmth spreading through Octavia's chest. It was such a simple thing, offering access to a library, and yet it felt profound in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She was still exploring the shelves, pulling down a volume of collected poems, when a voice spoke from behind her. "I'm glad to see you're recovering well." Octavia spun, the book clutched to her chest, and found Joel standing in the doorway. He wore simple clothes again, dark pants and a gray tunic that somehow made his ice-blue eyes seem even more striking. His dark hair was loose today, falling past his shoulders, and there was something about seeing him like this, casual and approachable, that made him seem simultaneously more and less intimidating than before. "Your Majesty," Octavia said, automatically dipping into a slight bow despite Mira's earlier informality. Something flickered across Joel's face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. "Please don't," he said gently. "Bow to me in the council chambers if you must, but not here. Not in the library. This is a place for minds to meet as equals, regardless of rank." Octavia straightened slowly, unsure how to respond to an alpha who actively discouraged shows of submission. Every pack she'd known operated on clear hierarchy, with dominance and deference woven into every interaction. "I'll leave you two to talk," Mira said brightly, already backing toward the door. "I need to check on something. In the other place." "Yes." She fled before either of them could protest, and Octavia suspected the young woman had planned this encounter all along. Silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Joel remained near the door, as if giving Octavia space to decide whether she wanted him to come closer or leave. "Thank you," Octavia finally said, holding up the book of poems. "For this, for letting me explore, for everything, really. I don't think I properly expressed my gratitude before." "You don't owe me gratitude," Joel said, and there was an earnestness in his voice that made her believe he truly meant it. "The Sacred Refuge isn't a favor I'm granting. It's an obligation I accepted willingly." "But why?" The question burst out before Octavia could stop it. "I've been lying in that room for 2 days, trying to understand why a king would invoke ancient protection for someone he doesn't know, someone who brings him nothing but complications. And I can't make it make sense." Joel was quiet for a long moment, and Octavia watched emotions play across his face. Consideration, uncertainty, and something that looked almost vulnerable. Finally, he moved further into the library, not directly toward her, but to one of the windows that overlooked the forest beyond. "Do you believe in destiny?" he asked, his voice contemplative. "I don't know," Octavia admitted. "I used to. When I was younger, I believed the moon had a plan for everyone. That suffering had purpose, and if you were patient and good, eventually you'd find your place in the world." She moved to stand a few feet away from him, both of them looking out at the snow-covered trees. "But then I spent 2 years trying to be perfect for someone who would never value me, and when that fell apart, when I was literally dying in the cold because I'd rather freeze than live that lie, destiny started feeling like a cruel joke. And now?" Joel asked, turning to look at her. "Now I'm standing in a castle I never imagined I'd see, under the protection of a king I'd only heard about in stories, and I don't know what to believe anymore," Octavia said honestly. "Maybe destiny exists. Maybe it's all just random chance. Maybe I'm only alive because you happened to be walking in the right forest at the right time. Except I don't believe in random chance," Joel said softly. "Not when it comes to you." The intensity in his gaze made Octavia's breath catch. "What do you mean?" Joel turned fully to face her now, and she could see him weighing his words carefully, as if what he was about to say mattered more than anything he'd spoken before. "I've walked those forests hundreds of times," he began. "In every season, at every hour. I know them as well as I know my own reflection. And that night, the night I found you, something pulled me in a direction I'd never gone before. Deeper into the trees, away from the usual paths, into a section of forest that borders Shadowfang territory." He took a breath, and Octavia saw his hands clench briefly at his sides before relaxing again. "I shouldn't have been there," he continued. "Had no logical reason to be there. But I kept walking, kept following this inexplicable certainty that I needed to go further, look harder, search more thoroughly. And then I caught your scent. So faint I almost missed it, nearly buried under the smell of snow and pine. But once I had it, I couldn't ignore it. It called to something primal in me, something that had been dormant my entire life." "Your wolf," Octavia whispered, remembering what he'd said before about his wolf recognizing her. "My wolf," Joel confirmed. "And more than that, my soul, if such things exist. Every instinct I possessed screamed that I needed to find you, that letting you die in that forest would be like letting a piece of myself die." He moved closer now, close enough that Octavia could see the fine details of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tensed when he was holding back emotion, the absolute sincerity in his ice-blue eyes. "So when you ask why I invoked the Sacred Refuge," Joel said quietly, "the answer is both simple and impossibly complex. I did it because I had to, because some part of me knew that you were important, that you were meant to be here, meant to be safe, meant to be—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know what you're meant to be yet, but I know with absolute certainty that letting you die was never an option." Octavia's heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. Everything he was describing, the pull, the recognition, the sense of rightness, echoed what she'd been feeling since waking in his castle. The awareness of where he was even when she couldn't see him. The way her chest felt lighter when he entered a room and heavier when he left. The inexplicable trust she felt toward a stranger who should have been intimidating, but instead felt like home. "True mates," she said, barely breathing the words. "That's what Mira said people are whispering, that we might be true mates." Joel's expression shifted into something fierce and tender at once. "I don't know if that's what this is. True mate bonds are rare enough that most of the information about them is legend rather than fact. But I know that I've never felt this way about anyone before. I know that your well-being matters to me more than it logically should for someone I've only just met. And I know that the thought of you leaving at the end of 28 days feels—" He struggled for words. "Wrong. Like watching the sun choose not to rise." Tears burned at the back of Octavia's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelm, of having this powerful alpha speak about her with such raw honesty, of feeling seen and valued in a way she'd never experienced. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Everything you're describing is everything I've ever wanted to hear. And that terrifies me because the last time I let myself believe in something beautiful, it destroyed me. I don't know if I can survive being wrong again." "Then don't believe in anything yet," Joel said gently. "Don't decide. Don't commit. Just stay for the full 28 days. Let me show you what it could be like to be valued, to be protected, to be seen as someone worthy of care and attention. And at the end, if you feel nothing, if this is all one-sided, you can walk away with no judgment and every resource I can provide." "And if I do feel something?" Octavia asked. "If this pull I'm feeling isn't just gratitude or trauma bonding or desperate need for safety?" Joel's expression transformed, hope lighting his features from within. "Then we figure it out together. No rush, no pressure, just honest exploration of whatever this connection between us might be." He extended his hand, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. "Can you give me that? 28 days to prove that you're safe here, that you matter here, that you're worth every moment of protection I can offer?" Octavia looked at his hand, at the strength evident in the long fingers and the scars that marked a life of training and responsibility. She thought about Marcus's hands, which had never touched her with tenderness, about her father's hands, which had pushed her toward a future she didn't want, about all the ways hands could hurt when they belonged to people who didn't value what they held. But Joel's hand wasn't demanding or grasping. It was simply offered, palm up, waiting for her choice. Slowly, carefully, Octavia placed her hand in his. The sensation was immediate and electric, not painful, but intense. Warmth spread from the point of contact up her arm and through her chest, settling somewhere deep beneath her ribs. She saw Joel's eyes widen slightly, saw him draw in a sharp breath, and knew he felt it too. 28 days. She agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll stay for 28 days. Joel's smile was radiant, transforming his face completely and making him look younger, less burdened. Thank you, he said. Thank you for trusting me enough to try. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it, and Octavia immediately felt the absence of his touch like a chill. Now, Joel said, his tone lightening, since you're finally well enough to explore, would you like a proper tour? I promise I'm much better at it than Mira, though infinitely less enthusiastic. Despite everything, Octavia laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its spontaneity. I'd like that very much. And as Joel led her from the library telling her stories about the castle's history and the wolves who called it home, Octavia felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but undeniably there. Chapter 4. The tour lasted most of the afternoon, and by the time they finished, Octavia's feet ached pleasantly from walking and her mind buzzed with new information. Joel showed her the Great Hall, massive and impressive with its vaulted ceiling and long tables that could seat hundreds. He explained that formal gatherings happened there. Celebrations, important announcements, ceremonies that required witnesses, but most days it sat empty and echoing. I prefer smaller meals in less formal settings, he admitted, as they stood in the doorway looking at the vast space. There's something lonely about eating in a hall designed for hundreds when you're sitting alone. The admission surprised Octavia with its vulnerability. She had assumed a king would relish the grandeur, would want the constant reminder of his power and position. But Joel spoke about the Great Hall the way she might speak about an uncomfortable piece of clothing, necessary for certain occasions, but never truly comfortable. He showed her the training grounds, visible through tall windows, where wolves in both human and shifted form practiced combat techniques. Unlike the aggressive dominance displays she'd witnessed in Silver Creek, the training here seemed more collaborative. Older warriors worked patiently with younger ones, correcting form and offering encouragement. She saw a female instructor demonstrating a complicated move to a group of eager students, none of whom seemed concerned about her Omega status diminishing her expertise. Strength without skill is just bravado, Joel explained when Octavia commented on the teaching approach. And skill without wisdom is just as dangerous. We train every member of the pack who wants to learn, regardless of their rank or designation. Some of our best fighters are Omegas who compensate for smaller size with intelligence and strategy. They visited the kitchens, warm and bustling with activity, where an older woman named Marta immediately scolded Joel for skipping breakfast, and then presented Octavia with fresh bread still steaming from the oven. The casual way the kitchen staff interacted with their king, respectful but not fearful, affectionate but not presumptuous, told Octavia more about his leadership style than any formal observation could. But it was the garden that truly captured Octavia's breath. They had to bundle into heavy cloaks to reach it, stepping out into the cold afternoon air through a door at the back of the castle. Octavia had expected the gardens to be dormant at this time of year, the flower beds empty and the paths icy. Instead, she found herself in a winter wonderland that had been deliberately maintained. Evergreen shrubs sculpted into graceful shapes provided structure, and scattered throughout were plantings that actually bloomed in the cold. Hardy winter roses with delicate white petals, snowberry bushes heavy with translucent berries, and something with tiny purple flowers that Joel identified as winter heath. But most magical were the ice sculptures. Someone had shaped the ice that formed naturally in the garden into fantastic forms. Wolves mid-leap, trees that spiraled toward the sky, abstract shapes that caught the afternoon sun and threw rainbows across the snow. They were temporary art, Octavia realized, destined to melt when spring arrived, but that somehow made them more precious. "Who creates these?" she asked, moving carefully down a cleared path toward a particularly stunning sculpture of two wolves, their forms intertwined in a way that suggested both dance and embrace. "I do," Joel said quietly from behind her. Octavia turned to stare at him. "You?" A slight flush colored his cheeks, though it might have been the cold. "It's a hobby. Something I started after my father died, when I needed a way to process grief that didn't involve making decisions or leading meetings. Ice is—" He moved to stand beside her, looking at the sculpture she'd been admiring. "Ice is temporary, but beautiful. It requires attention and care, but it also requires accepting that nothing lasts forever. It's helped me learn to value moments rather than just outcomes." Octavia looked at the sculpture with new eyes, seeing not just technical skill, but emotion carved into frozen water. The two wolves weren't just intertwined. They were supporting each other, their weight balanced in a way that suggested neither could stand alone, but together they created something stable and beautiful. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "Thank you." Joel's voice was warm, pleased in a way that seemed disproportionate to a simple compliment about art. "I've never shown anyone the garden in winter before. Most people find it too cold to appreciate." "Then they're missing something extraordinary," Octavia said. She turned to look at him fully, taking in the way the afternoon light caught in his dark hair and made his ice-blue eyes seem almost luminescent. "Why did you show me?" Joel was quiet for a moment, his gaze holding hers with that intense focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. "Because you see things," he finally said. "Really see them, rather than just looking. When you walked into the library, you didn't just see books. You saw possibilities. When we entered the training grounds, you noticed the teaching, not just the fighting. And now, in this garden, you see beauty instead of just cold." He moved fractionally closer, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his larger frame despite the winter air around them. "I wanted you to see this," he continued, "because it's the one place in the castle where I'm not the king first, where I'm just myself, and I wanted to share that with you." The vulnerability in his admission made Octavia's chest ache. She had spent so much time thinking about what it meant for her to be here, what she needed from this arrangement, that she hadn't fully considered what Joel might need. He was lonely, surrounded by hundreds of pack members, protected by loyal guards, advised by wise council members, and yet fundamentally alone in the way that came from always being the one others looked to, never the one who could show weakness or uncertainty. "Thank you," Octavia said, "for trusting me with this, with you." Something blazed in Joel's eyes, bright and fierce, and for a moment Octavia thought he might close the remaining distance between them. But instead, he offered his arm in a gentlemanly gesture. "Come," he said, his voice rougher than before. "There's one more thing I want to show you before the sun sets." He led her through the garden to a gate she hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by evergreen branches. Beyond the gate, a path had been carefully cleared through the snow, winding up a gentle hill. They walked in comfortable silence, and Octavia found herself increasingly aware of every point where their bodies almost touched, his arm beneath her hand, his hip occasionally brushing hers when the path narrowed, the way his breath formed clouds in the cold air that mixed with hers. At the top of the hill stood a pavilion, open-sided, but with a roof that provided shelter from falling snow. Inside were benches and a fire pit that currently held cold ashes, and the view— Octavia gasped. From this vantage point, she could see the entire territory spread before her, the castle behind them, majestic against the darkening sky. The settlement below, lights beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for evening meals. The forest stretching endlessly in every direction, and beyond them, the mountains that ringed the horizon like protective walls. "When the weight gets too heavy," Joel said softly, "when I can't see the way forward and I'm drowning in decisions that affect thousands of lives, I come here. And I remember that I'm part of something bigger than myself. that the territory was here before me and will be here after me, and my job isn't to control everything but simply to shepherd it through my brief time as guardian. Us. He turned to face her, and in the fading light his expression was open and honest in a way that felt like a gift. I wanted to share this with you, he said, because you asked why I saved you. And part of the answer is here, in this view. Every wolf in this territory matters, Octavia. Every single life has value, regardless of rank or designation or usefulness. And when I found you dying in the snow, I saw a life that mattered. A wolf who deserved to be saved, not because of what you could offer me or the pack, but simply because you existed, and your existence has inherent worth. Tears spilled down Octavia's cheeks before she could stop them. In her entire life, no one had ever spoken about her like that. She had always been valued conditionally, for her potential as a mate, for her family connections, for what she could provide. But Joel was saying she mattered simply for being. I don't know how to accept that, she admitted through her tears. I've spent my whole life being told I needed to earn my place, to prove I was worthy of basic care and consideration, and you're offering it freely, expecting nothing in return, and I don't understand it. Joel moved closer, and this time he didn't stop until he was right in front of her. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he raised his hands to cup her face, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. Then let me teach you, he said softly. For the next 28 days, let me show you what it feels like to be valued without conditions, to be cared for without expectations, to be seen as inherently worthy of protection and kindness. His touch was warm despite the cold air, and Octavia found herself leaning into it, seeking the comfort and safety his presence offered. This close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, evidence of years carrying heavy burdens, could smell his scent, pine and winter air, and something uniquely him that made her wolf stir with interest and recognition. What if I start believing it? She whispered. What if I let myself trust this, and then the 28 days end, and I have to leave and go back to a world where I'm not valued? Then you don't go back to that world, Joel said firmly. You stay here, or you go somewhere new, but you never accept less than you deserve again. Because once you truly understand your worth, Octavia, you'll never be able to unsee it. He was so close now that she could feel his breath ghost across her lips. Her heart was beating frantically, and that invisible thread she'd felt connecting them since she woke in his castle pulled taut with anticipation. Joel, she breathed, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she needed something. Tell me to stop, he said, his voice rough with restraint. If you don't want this, if it's too much too soon, tell me to stop, and I will. But Octavia didn't want him to stop. Despite every rational thought screaming that this was too fast, too intense, too risky, she wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be kissed by someone who valued her. Don't stop, she whispered, and Joel kissed her. It was gentle at first, barely more than a brush of lips, asking rather than demanding. But when Octavia made a small sound of need and pressed closer, the kiss deepened. His hand slid from her face to her waist, pulling her against him, and Octavia wrapped her arms around his neck, losing herself in the sensation of being held, being wanted, being cherished. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Joel rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the moment you opened your eyes in that bed, he admitted, and it was worth every second of waiting. Octavia laughed, the sound breathless and happy. Only 2 days ago. 2 of the longest days of my life, Joel said with a slight smile. Then, more seriously, this doesn't have to mean anything you're not ready for it to mean. It can just be a kiss, a moment, nothing more. But even as he said it, Octavia knew it was a lie. That kiss had meant something. Something profound and potentially life-changing. It had confirmed what she'd been feeling since waking in his castle, what she'd been too afraid to name. She was falling for him, for this powerful king who created art from ice and spoke about her worth like it was self-evident, for this lonely alpha who walked forests at night and valued every member of his pack, for this gentle, fierce, complicated man who had saved her life and was now offering her a chance to rebuild it. "It means something," Octavia said quietly. "I don't know exactly what yet, but it means something." Joel's smile was radiant. "Good, because it means something to me too. Something I'm very much looking forward to discovering with you." They stayed in the pavilion until full dark, talking about everything and nothing, stealing occasional kisses that grew more confident with each repetition. And when they finally walked back to the castle, Octavia's hand tucked securely in Joel's, she felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt like she might actually deserve to be happy. Chapter 5. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Octavia would wake each morning to sunlight streaming through her windows and the sound of Mira bringing breakfast, always accompanied by cheerful commentary about the day's happenings in the castle. She'd dress in the comfortable clothes that kept appearing in her wardrobe, simple but well-made, in colors that complemented her complexion in ways her old clothes never had. And then she'd explore, sometimes with Joel, when his duties allowed. He'd find her in the library or the garden and steal an hour or two, showing her hidden corners of the castle, or simply sitting with her in companionable silence while they both read. Those moments felt precious in their simplicity. No expectations, no performance, just two people choosing to share space. Other times she explored alone, learning the castle's layout and rhythms. She discovered a music room where someone had left a harp with several broken strings, and spent an afternoon carefully restringing it based on half-remembered lessons from childhood. She found a conservatory filled with plants that somehow thrived despite the winter cold, tended by a quiet gardener named Soren, who taught her the names of exotic flowers she'd never seen before. And everywhere she went, Frost Peak wolves greeted her with warmth that seemed genuine rather than obligatory. No one questioned her presence or made her feel like an intruder. When she mentioned this to Mira one evening, the young woman had laughed. "Of course they don't question you," Mira said. "You're under His Majesty's Sacred Refuge. That makes you family, regardless of where you came from or why you're here. Family." The word settled strangely in Octavia's chest. She'd had a family once, parents and siblings in Silver Creek, but she'd never truly felt like she belonged. Had always been slightly apart, watching others connect in ways that seemed effortless while she struggled to find her place. But here, in this castle full of strangers, she was beginning to feel something that might be belonging. It was the 8th day of her stay when everything shifted. Octavia had been in the library, curled up in her favorite window seat with a book of legends, when raised voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the castle. Not quite shouting, but loud enough and sharp enough to carry through the stone corridors. She set down her book, debating whether to investigate or mind her own business. But when the voices grew louder, and she recognized one of them as Joel's, controlled but clearly frustrated, concern overrode caution. Following the sound led her to a corridor she hadn't explored before, ending in a set of ornate double doors that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see what appeared to be a formal meeting room, with a large table surrounded by high-backed chairs. Several wolves sat around that table, all older, all radiating the kind of authority that came from years of leadership. The council, Octavia realized. These must be Joel's advisors. "You cannot simply ignore tradition because it's inconvenient," one of the council members was saying, his voice carrying the particular edge of someone who believed themselves inarguably correct. The Sacred Refuge was never intended for situations like this. "The Sacred Refuge," Joel's voice responded, measured but tight with restrained emotion, "was intended for any wolf in mortal danger within my territory. Octavia meets that criteria. The circumstances of how she came to be in danger are irrelevant to the oath's validity. But the complications," another voice interjected, this one female and slightly gentler. "Marcus Shadowfang has sent formal inquiries about the Omega. Her former pack is demanding answers. You've placed us in a delicate position by sheltering someone who was promised elsewhere." Octavia's stomach clenched. She'd known this was coming, known that her presence here would eventually create difficulties, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I don't care about Marcus's inquiries or Silver Creek's demands, Joel said, and now there was steel beneath the measured tone. Octavia refused the mate bond, which is her right. She owes Marcus nothing. She owes her former pack nothing. And any complications that arise from me honoring an ancient oath are mine to handle, not hers. Your Majesty, a third voice spoke, this one older and weighted with something that sounded like genuine concern. No one questions your right to invoke the Sacred Refuge, but we must consider the broader implications. If Marcus chooses to make this a formal grievance, if he brings it before the High Council of Territories, then I will answer to the High Council, Joel interrupted, and they will find that every aspect of the Sacred Refuge was properly invoked and executed. I saved a dying wolf. That's not negotiable, not debatable, and not subject to approval from anyone. Even if it means risking relationships with neighboring territories, the first voice challenged. Even if it creates tension that could destabilize years of careful balance. A pause. Then Joel's voice, quieter but somehow more powerful. Especially then. Because the moment we start weighing a wolf's worth against convenience or diplomatic relations, we've lost something essential. We've stopped being guardians and started being negotiators. And I refuse to negotiate with someone's right to choose their own fate. Octavia's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She should leave, should stop eavesdropping on this private conversation. But she couldn't move, couldn't tear herself away from hearing Joel defend her to his own counsel, couldn't stop her heart from swelling with something too big to name. The girl seems pleasant enough, the female voice said, more gently now. But Your Majesty, you must see how this looks. You've never invoked the Sacred Refuge before. You've never shown particular interest in an unmated Omega. And now suddenly you're risking diplomatic complications for someone you've known barely more than a week? People will talk. They'll assume. Let them assume, Joel said. Let them talk. My decisions regarding the Sacred Refuge are not subject to pack gossip or speculation. But are they subject to truth? This was a new voice, younger, carrying a note of something almost affectionate beneath the challenge. Because I think we all know this isn't just about the Sacred Refuge anymore, is it? Silence. Heavy and meaningful. Then Joel, his voice rough with something that might have been vulnerability. No, it's not just about the oath anymore. Octavia's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her heart beating so loudly she was certain they could hear it in the council chamber. Ah, the older male voice said, and now it carried understanding. So it's like that then. I don't know what it is yet, Joel admitted, but I know that she matters, that her happiness matters, that the thought of sending her away at the end of the refuge period feels... He trailed off, seeming to search for words. It feels like cutting off a limb, like losing something essential before I've fully understood what I had. True mate bonds don't wait for understanding. The female voice said softly. They simply are. And if that's what this is, Your Majesty, then no amount of diplomatic complication will matter. You'll do what you must to keep her safe, which is exactly what concerns us. The first, more challenging voice interjected. Because a king who acts on emotion rather than logic can be both strong and compassionate, Joel's voice had sharpened again, can value individual wolves as much as political strategy, can recognize that sometimes the most logical choice is the one that protects rather than calculates. More silence. Then the younger voice, carrying warmth. You've made your position clear, Your Majesty, and for what it's worth, I support it. The girl, Octavia, she seems genuine, kind. And I've seen the way you look at her. Haven't seen you look at anyone like that in the 7 years since you took the throne. Theron is right, the female voice agreed. We've watched you shoulder the weight of leadership without complaint, watched you put pack needs above your own desires consistently. If this Omega makes you happy, if she's the one the moon chose for you, then we should support that, not create obstacles. Marcus won't let this go easily, the older voice warned. He's proud, humiliated. That's a dangerous combination. Then he'll have to learn to live with disappointment, Joel said firmly. Because Octavia is staying, for as long as she chooses, and anyone who has a problem with that can bring their grievances directly to me. Octavia knew she should move before someone discovered her eavesdropping, but she remained frozen, processing everything she'd heard. Joel was defending her to his counsel, risking relationships and facing challenges, all because she mattered to him. She mattered. Not as a tool or a bargaining chip or a convenient arrangement, but as a person whose happiness he valued above diplomatic ease. The sound of chairs scraping, the council meeting apparently ending, finally jolted Octavia into action. She hurried back down the corridor, her mind racing, and nearly collided with Mira coming from the opposite direction. "There you are," Mira said brightly. "I've been looking everywhere for you. His Majesty wanted me to tell you that—" "Oh." She paused, clearly reading something in Octavia's expression. "What happened? You look like you've seen something shocking." "I heard something," Octavia admitted. "Something I probably wasn't supposed to hear." Mira's eyes widened with curiosity, but before she could ask, Joel's voice called from behind them. "Octavia." She turned to find him approaching, his formal council face still in place but softening as he got closer. The council members trailed behind him, and Octavia had a moment of panic that they'd somehow know she'd been listening. But Joel's attention was entirely on her, his ice-blue eyes searching her face with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "You look upset." "I'm fine," Octavia said too quickly. I was exploring and I heard voices and I should have walked away but I didn't, and I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but—" "Breathe," Joel said gently, reaching out to take her hand. The gesture was casual, comfortable, as if they'd been touching like this for years rather than days. "Whatever you heard, you don't need to apologize for it. These are complicated matters, and you have every right to know what's being said about your situation." One of the council members, the older male with the concerned voice, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, perhaps proper introductions would be appropriate." Joel nodded, though he didn't release Octavia's hand. If anything, he drew her slightly closer. A subtle claim that wasn't quite possessive but definitely protective. "Octavia," he said. "These are my council members. Elder Thomas," he indicated the older male, "who has served as advisor since my father's time. Lady Margot," the female counselor inclined her head gracefully, "who oversees all matters of territory management. Counselor Bren," the challenging voice, a stern-faced man who looked at Octavia with obvious skepticism, "who handles relationships with neighboring packs. And Theron," the younger wolf grinned at her, "my second and closest friend, who claims his only job is keeping me from being too serious. Though clearly I'm failing at that task," Theron said with a theatrical sigh. "Your Majesty gets more serious by the year." "Someone has to balance your complete lack of gravitas," Joel retorted, but there was affection in his voice. The counselors studied Octavia with varying degrees of curiosity and assessment, and she fought the urge to fidget under their collective scrutiny. These were the wolves who advised Joel on every major decision, who helped him lead thousands of pack members. Their opinions mattered, whether or not they had the final say. "It's an honor to meet you all," Octavia said, dipping her head respectfully. "And I apologize for creating complications with my presence here." "You haven't created anything," Lady Margot said firmly. "Marcus Shadowfang created complications by attempting to bind you against your heart's desires. You merely had the courage to refuse. That's admirable, not problematic." The kindness in her words made Octavia's throat tight. "Though you must admit," Counselor Bren said, his tone still skeptical, "the timing is curious. Breaking a mate bond on the day of the ceremony, fleeing into a territory you had no prior connection to, ending up under the protection of the most powerful alpha in the northern regions. Are you suggesting she planned this?" Joel's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "That she deliberately nearly died of exposure as some elaborate scheme? I'm suggesting that we don't actually know anything about this Omega beyond what she's told us," Bren replied evenly. "And caution is warranted when dealing with unknowns." "Then let me tell you what I know," Octavia said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I know that I spent 2 years trying to be perfect for someone who never wanted me. I know that on my wedding day, I heard my intended mate tell his beta that he planned to keep me isolated while loving someone else. I know that I ran because living that lie felt worse than dying in the cold. She straightened her spine, meeting Bren's skeptical gaze directly. I know that your king saved my life when he had no obligation to do so. That he's offered me protection without demanding anything in return. That he's shown me more genuine kindness in 8 days than I received in 2 years from the wolf I was promised to. And I know that I have no schemes, no hidden agendas, no grand plans beyond trying to heal from rejection and figure out who I am when I'm not performing for someone else's approval. Her voice shook slightly on the last words, but she didn't look away from Bren's assessing stare. Finally, the counselor's expression shifted, not quite to warmth, but to something like respect. Well said, Miss Octavia. Perhaps you have more steel than I gave you credit for. She has more everything than you gave her credit for, Joel said, and the pride in his voice made Octavia's cheeks flush, which you'd know if you spent less time being suspicious and more time actually talking to her. Perhaps you're right, Your Majesty, Bren conceded with a slight bow. I apologize if my caution caused offense. Apology accepted, Octavia said, though her heart was still beating fast from her outburst. The council members took their leave after that, though Lady Margot paused to squeeze Octavia's shoulder gently and whisper, You're good for him. Don't let the difficult ones scare you off. When they were finally alone, Mira having tactfully disappeared at some point, Joel turned to face Octavia fully. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he said, and I'm sorry Bren challenged you. He means well, but he's cautious to the point of paranoia sometimes. He's protecting you, Octavia said. Protecting the pack. I understand that. And honestly, his concerns aren't unfounded. My being here does create complications. Complications I'm willing to handle, Joel said firmly. He raised her hand, the one he'd been holding through the entire council interaction, and pressed it over his heart. Octavia, I need you to understand something. The complications, the diplomatic tensions, the questions from neighboring packs, none of that matters more than your safety and happiness. None of it. But it should, Octavia protested. You're a king. You have responsibilities to thousands of wolves. You can't just... Can't just what? Joel interrupted gently. Can't just value one wolf's well-being? Can't just recognize when something is more important than political convenience? Can't just listen to my wolf and my heart when they're both screaming that you're meant to be here? He drew her closer, until they stood in the same intimate proximity as that evening in the garden pavilion. You matter, Octavia, he said softly, but with absolute conviction. You matter more than you've been taught to believe, and I will spend however long it takes proving that to you, regardless of how many counselors question it or how many complications arise. Octavia's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I'm falling for you, she whispered, and it terrifies me, because I don't know if I'm feeling this because of who you are, or because you saved me, or because I'm so desperate to be valued that I'm confusing gratitude with... Joel kissed her, swallowing the rest of her doubts. It was different from their first kiss in the pavilion, less gentle, more urgent, carrying weeks of restrained emotion. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. I'm falling for you too, he said against her lips. Have been since the moment I found you in the snow, and my wolf recognized something my mind couldn't yet name. And yes, maybe it's fast, maybe it's complicated. Maybe we're both confused about what we're feeling. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. But maybe, he continued, the moon is bigger than our doubts and fears. Maybe she brought us together despite the impossible circumstances because we're meant to heal each other. You from your rejection, me from my loneliness. And maybe, just maybe, 28 days will be more than enough time to know for certain. And if it's not? Octavia asked. If I'm still confused at the end? Then we extend the refuge, Joel said simply. As many times as you need. Until you're certain one way or another. I told you before. Your choice, your timeline, your life. I mean that. Octavia studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or hidden expectations, but she found only honest emotion, vulnerable in its intensity. Okay, she said finally. Okay, let's see where this goes. Joel's smile was brilliant, transforming his serious features into something almost boyish. Thank you for trusting me enough to try. He offered his arm in that familiar gesture, and Octavia took it, letting him lead her through the castle corridors toward the gardens. And as they walked in comfortable silence, she realized something that felt profound in its simplicity. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to be anyone other than herself. Wasn't performing or calculating or measuring her words to ensure approval. She was just being. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Chapter 6. The next week passed in a blur of discovery and deepening connection. Joel made time for her every day, carving hours out of his responsibilities to show her more of the territory, or simply sit with her in the library, reading companionably while the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside. They talked about everything: childhoods and dreams, fears and hopes, the thousand small details that make a person real. Octavia learned that Joel had lost his mother young, before he could form lasting memories of her, that he'd been raised primarily by his father and the castle staff, preparing from early childhood for the role he'd eventually inherit, that he loved history and poetry, but felt guilty about time spent reading when there were always pack matters demanding attention. My father used to say that a king who didn't make time for joy would become a tyrant, Joel told her one evening as they sat in his private study, a room he'd only recently invited her into. That leadership without balance led to bitterness and harsh decisions. But it's harder than it sounds, finding that balance when there's always one more problem to solve, one more concern to address. Do I help? Octavia asked quietly. With the balance, I mean. Joel looked up from the book he'd been holding, his ice blue eyes soft in the lamplight. You help more than you know. You're the only person in this castle who treats me like Joel first and King second, who challenges my opinions without fear and listens to my doubts without judgment, who makes me laugh and reminds me that I'm allowed to want things beyond duty. He set down the book and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. You make me feel human again, he said simply. Not just a role, not just responsibility. Actually, genuinely human. And I didn't realize how much I needed that until you were here. Octavia ran her fingers through his long, dark hair, marveling at how comfortable this had become. Touching him, being touched, existing in each other's space without constant tension or performance. I feel human too, she admitted. Or maybe I feel like myself for the first time. Like I'm discovering who Octavia actually is beneath all the layers of expectation and performance I've been wearing since childhood. And who is she? Joel asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Who is Octavia when she's free to choose? Octavia thought about it, really considered the question. She's quieter than I thought she'd be, more introspective. She likes books and gardens and comfortable silences. She's braver than she believed possible, but still scared of so many things. She wants to matter, but doesn't need to be the center of attention. She wants to be chosen, but not owned. She trailed off, looking into Joel's eyes and seeing her own hopes reflected there. She wants to be loved, Octavia finished softly. Not for what she can provide or how useful she is, or how perfectly she fills a role. Just loved for existing, for being herself, whoever that turns out to be. Then she's already getting what she wants, Joel said, his voice rough with emotion. Because I love you, Octavia. I'm falling more in love with you every day. With your kindness and your strength, and your terrible habit of biting your lip when you're nervous. With the way you see beauty in small things and approach the world with genuine curiosity, despite how cruelly it's treated you. Octavia's breath caught. Joel? I know it's fast, he continued. I know we're still in the Sacred Refuge period, and you might think I'm just saying this to convince you to stay. But that's not what this is. This is me, sitting on the floor of my study with the woman who's transformed my entire world in 2 weeks, telling her the absolute truth. I love you. And whether you choose to stay or go at the end of the refuge, that won't change. Tears spilled down Octavia's cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I love you too. she whispered. I tried not to. Tried to convince myself it was too soon, too complicated, too risky. But I love you. I love your thoughtfulness and your loneliness and the way you create art from ice. I love how you listen when I talk and how you defend me to your counsel and how you make me feel like I matter. Joel surged up, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. Octavia wound her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and for long moments they simply held each other, communicating through touch what words couldn't fully express. When they finally broke apart, Joel pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he breathed. Not just for the refuge period. Stay permanently. Accept a place in my pack, in my life, in my heart. Yes, Octavia said without hesitation. Yes, I'll stay. A sharp knock at the study door interrupted them. Joel made a sound of frustration but didn't move away from Octavia. This had better be important, he called. The door opened to reveal Theron, his usually cheerful expression replaced by something serious. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation. Marcus Shadowfang has sent another envoy. They're at the border requesting entry and an audience. They say they have a message from the High Council of Territories regarding the Sacred Refuge. All the warmth drained from Joel's expression, replaced by cold authority. He stood, helping Octavia to her feet, and his entire demeanor shifted into the commanding alpha she'd glimpsed during the council meeting. How many in the envoy? He asked. Just 3. Marcus isn't with them. He sent his beta and 2 advisors. They're carrying official documentation. Joel was silent for a moment, clearly thinking through options and implications. Then he nodded decisively. Grant them entry. House them in the East Wing guest quarters. I'll meet with them tomorrow morning in the formal receiving room. He glanced at Octavia, and increased security around Octavia's quarters. Discreetly, but effectively. Already done, Your Majesty, Theron said. Then, more gently, they can't take her. The Sacred Refuge is absolute. Even if the High Council questions it, which they probably won't, the final authority rests with you. I know, Joel said, but I'm not taking chances. After Theron left, Joel turned back to Octavia, and she saw worry beneath his controlled expression. I won't let them take you, he said firmly. No matter what Marcus thinks he can accomplish with official documentation or High Council involvement. You said you'd stay. That means you're mine to protect now, refuge or no refuge. Ours, Octavia corrected gently. We protect each other. That's what mates do, right? Something fierce and possessive flashed in Joel's eyes. Mates. Say that again. Mates, Octavia repeated, more confidently this time, because that's what we are, aren't we? True mates chosen by the moon, even if we're still figuring out what that means. Joel pulled her close again, burying his face in her hair. Yes, he breathed. That's exactly what we are. And nothing Marcus or the High Council or anyone else says will change that. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, drawing strength from the connection between them. And Octavia realized that she was no longer afraid. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Marcus's envoy brought, she would face it with Joel beside her, with a mate who valued her, a pack that was beginning to accept her, and the absolute certainty that she deserved to be happy. The frightened wolf who had run into the snow 2 weeks ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone loved, someone who had finally, miraculously, found home. Chapter 7. The meeting with Marcus's envoy happened at dawn, and despite Joel's suggestion that Octavia didn't need to attend, she insisted on being present. They're here because of me, she said firmly, as Mira helped her dress in a formal gown Joel had commissioned. Deep forest green with silver embroidery that echoed the Frost Peak colors. I won't hide while others discuss my fate like I'm not capable of speaking for myself. Pride had flashed across Joel's face when she said that, and he'd kissed her soundly before leading her to the formal receiving room. The space was impressive, designed to remind visitors of Frost Peak's power and authority. High ceilings, stone walls hung with banners representing different pack families, and at the far end, a raised platform where Joel's formal chair sat. Not quite a throne, but close enough to make a statement. Joel took his seat with the easy authority of someone born to lead, and Octavia stood beside him, rather than in the lower seating area where guests and petitioners usually waited. The positioning was deliberate, a statement that she wasn't a subject to be discussed, but an equal participant in the conversation. Marcus's beta, a hard-faced man named Owen, entered with 2 advisors. All 3 showed appropriate respect to Joel, but their eyes kept drifting to Octavia with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Alpha King Joel, Owen began formally, we bring greetings from Alpha Marcus Shadowfang and documentation from the High Council of Territories regarding the Sacred Refuge currently sheltering Octavia of Silver Creek. Present your documentation, Joel said, his voice carrying none of the warmth Octavia had grown accustomed to. This was the king, not the man she loved. Owen approached and handed a sealed scroll to Theron, who brought it to Joel. Everyone watched in tense silence as Joel broke the seal and read the contents, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. Finally, he looked up. This is a request for clarification, not a challenge to the refuge itself. The High Council wants confirmation that the Sacred Refuge was properly invoked and that the protected party remains under shelter voluntarily rather than by coercion. Which is a polite way of asking if you're holding her prisoner, Owen said bluntly. I'm not, Joel said coldly. As anyone who has actually spoken to Octavia rather than making assumptions about her situation could tell you. Then let her speak for herself, one of the advisors suggested. If she's truly free to choose, let her state her position clearly for the record. Joel looked at Octavia, and in his eyes she saw both trust and the slightest edge of concern. He would support whatever she said, but he couldn't control how she'd respond to direct confrontation with representatives from the pack that had rejected her. Octavia stepped forward, drawing on reserves of courage she was still discovering she possessed. My name is Octavia, formerly of Silver Creek, she said clearly. 2 weeks ago, I refused a mate bond with Marcus Shadowfang because I learned he intended to keep me isolated while loving another wolf. I chose to walk away rather than accept a life as his convenient arrangement. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. I fled into the winter forest without a clear destination, and yes, I would have died there if King Joel hadn't found me. He invoked the Sacred Refuge, brought me to his castle, and provided protection while I healed physically and emotionally. At no point has he coerced, manipulated, or pressured me. Every choice I've made since arriving has been freely given. Owen's expression remained skeptical. And what choice have you made regarding your future? Will you return to Silver Creek to face your family and the consequences of your broken agreement? No, Octavia said simply. I will not return to a pack that values agreements over well-being, that would have forced me into a bond with someone who didn't want me just to maintain favorable relationships with neighbors. So you'll stay here, Owen said, under the king's protection, conveniently shielded from any accountability. She'll stay here as my mate, Joel said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Not as my prisoner or my obligation, but as my chosen partner, the woman the moon herself crafted for me. And yes, that means she's under my protection. That's what mates do. They protect each other. The declaration sent ripples through the room. Octavia heard gasps from the guards stationed along the walls, saw shock register on the envoys' faces. Your mate, Owen repeated slowly. You're claiming she's your true mate? I'm not claiming anything, Joel said. I'm stating a fact. Octavia is my true mate. We recognized each other the moment I found her in the forest, though it took time for us to understand what we were feeling. The Sacred Refuge gave us that time. And now that we know, now that we've chosen each other, no one, not Marcus, not the High Council, not anyone, has any right to question or interfere with our bond. Owen exchanged glances with his companions, clearly uncertain how to proceed. True mate bonds were sacred, recognized by every pack as inviolable. If Joel and Octavia were truly mates, Marcus's grievances became irrelevant. Alpha Marcus will want proof, Owen finally said. True mate bonds show physical signs. The mark, the scent, are none of your business, Joel interrupted. The bond between mates is private and sacred. I'm not submitting Octavia to examination like she's property to be authenticated. Then you're asking us to simply accept your word, Owen challenged. I'm not asking, Joel said quietly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I'm telling you how things are. And if Marcus wants to challenge that, he's welcome to bring his grievances before the High Council formally. But he should know that contesting a true mate bond is serious business. It requires evidence of deception or coercion, and he has none because none exists. Octavia watched the careful control on Owen's face crack slightly, revealing frustration beneath. This clearly wasn't the outcome they'd hoped for. What message should we carry back to Alpha Marcus? Owen asked stiffly. Tell him that Octavia is exactly where she's meant to be, Joel said. Tell him that she's loved and valued and protected. And tell him that any further attempts to reclaim or challenge her will be met with the full force of Frost Peak's authority. He stood then, using his height and presence to dominate the space. Tell him, Joel continued, his voice carrying absolute finality, that she chose differently, and that her choice is final. The envoy departed shortly after, escorted from the territory by Frost Peak guards, and Octavia finally allowed herself to breathe fully. That was terrifying, she admitted as soon as they were alone. You were magnificent, Joel said, pulling her into his arms. Strong and clear and absolutely perfect. I've never been more proud. You called me your mate, Octavia said. In front of witnesses. In front of representatives who will carry that information back to Marcus and the High Council. That's binding, Joel. You can't take it back. I don't want to take it back, Joel said firmly. I want everyone to know. Want every wolf in the territories to understand that you're mine, and I'm yours, and that bond is sacred. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his expression serious. Unless you're not ready for that, he added. If I moved too fast, if claiming you publicly was premature, I can send messengers clarifying that. Octavia silenced him with a kiss. Don't you dare, she said against his lips. Don't you dare take it back. I want to be your mate, Joel. Publicly, privately, in every way that matters. I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. Joel's smile was radiant. Then let's make it official. Let's complete the mate bond properly, with ceremony and witnesses and all the traditional elements. When? Octavia asked. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow? Next week? Next month? Your choice, your timeline. Octavia thought about it. About the difference between this and the wedding she'd run from. Marcus had never asked what she wanted, had simply told her when and where to appear. But Joel was offering choice, even in this. 3 days, she decided. That gives us time to prepare properly but doesn't drag things out. And Joel, I want it small. Just us, your council, and anyone from the pack who genuinely wants to celebrate with us. No forced attendance, no obligation. Just genuine joy. Whatever you want, Joel promised. However you want. This is your ceremony as much as mine, Octavia. We do it together, or we don't do it at all. And in that moment, standing in the formal receiving room where she'd just publicly claimed her future, Octavia knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. The moon had led her through darkness and cold and rejection, but she'd emerged on the other side into warmth and love and acceptance. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 8. The 3 days before the ceremony passed in a whirlwind of preparation and unexpected joy. Octavia had worried that Joel's pack wouldn't accept a mate who appeared out of nowhere, a rejected Omega with no resources or connections, but she'd underestimated how much the Frost Peak wolves loved their king and wanted to see him happy. Gifts appeared at her door, small, handmade tokens of welcome. A carved wooden wolf from Soren the gardener, a scarf in Frost Peak colors knitted by one of the elder pack members, a book of poems with a note from the castle librarian saying she'd noticed Octavia's reading preferences and thought she'd enjoy this particular collection. Mira had cried happy tears while helping Octavia choose a ceremony dress. Not the elaborate white gown she'd worn for Marcus, but something simpler and more meaningful, deep blue like midnight, with silver thread embroidered in patterns of stars and moons. It made Octavia feel like herself rather than like someone playing a role. Lady Margot had taken Octavia aside the day before the ceremony to have what she called the important conversation. Mating ceremonies are beautiful, the counselor had said gently, but they're just the beginning. Marriage, true partnership, requires work and compromise and communication. You and His Majesty are starting from a place of genuine love, which is more than many bonded pairs can claim. But love alone isn't enough. You'll need to learn each other's patterns, navigate disagreements, support each other through difficulties. She'd paused, studying Octavia with kind eyes. The question is, are you ready for that? Because it's easy to love someone during the honeymoon period when everything is new and exciting. It's harder when reality sets in, when you're dealing with the day-to-day challenges of building a life together. Octavia had considered the question seriously. I know I'm young and inexperienced in relationships. I know I've only known Joel for 2 weeks, which seems impossibly short for making a life-altering decision. But I also know that I feel more myself with him than I've felt with anyone. That he listens when I speak and values my thoughts even when they differ from his. That he's shown me consistent kindness without expecting anything in return. She'd met Lady Margot's gaze directly. Will it be hard sometimes? Probably. Will we have disagreements and challenges? Definitely. But I'd rather face difficulties with Joel than have an easy life with someone who doesn't see me. So yes, I'm ready. As ready as anyone can be for a future they can't fully predict. Lady Margot had smiled then, warm and genuine. Good answer. And for what it's worth, I think you'll be excellent for him. He needs someone who will challenge him, support him, and remind him that he's more than just his responsibilities. You do that already, and you haven't even formally bonded yet. Now, standing in her room on the morning of the ceremony, Octavia felt surprisingly calm. No panic, no urge to flee, no crushing doubts, just peaceful certainty that she was making the right choice. Mira bustled around making final adjustments to Octavia's hair, left mostly loose as Joel preferred, but with small braids woven through and tiny silver ornaments catching the light. You look beautiful, Mira said, her voice thick with emotion. Absolutely perfect. His Majesty is going to lose his ability to speak when he sees you. He'd better not, Octavia said with a small laugh. There are vows involved. Speaking is fairly essential. A soft knock at the door announced Theron's arrival. Ready? He asked, grinning. Because there's a very impatient Alpha King pacing in the garden wondering if it's improper to check on his bride before the ceremony. Tell him I'm fine and he'll see me soon, Octavia said. Then, more quietly, and Theron, thank you for supporting this, for helping him. Theron's expression softened. I've been Joel's friend since we were children. I've watched him shoulder impossible burdens and put everyone else's needs before his own for 7 years. You've given him something he desperately needed. Joy. Genuine, uncomplicated joy. That's worth supporting. The ceremony took place in the winter garden, among Joel's ice sculptures and the hardy plants that bloomed in cold. The council stood as witnesses, along with perhaps 50 pack members who had genuinely wanted to attend. No forced audience, no obligatory crowd, just wolves who cared about their king's happiness. Octavia walked down a cleared path alone, having gently declined Theron's offer to escort her. This wasn't about being given away or transferred from one authority to another. This was about choosing, freely and independently, to bind her life to Joel's. And when she saw him waiting at the end of the path, backlit by afternoon sun that made his dark hair shine and his ice-blue eyes glow, her breath caught with the simple perfection of the moment. He wore formal clothes in frost-peak colors, black and silver with intricate embroidery, but his expression was pure Joel rather than king, vulnerable and hoping and completely in love. Elder Thomas officiated, speaking the traditional words about bonds and choices and the moon's wisdom in crafting pairs that completed each other. But Octavia barely heard the formal parts. Her attention was entirely on Joel, on the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. When it came time for vows, Joel went first. Octavia, he said, his voice carrying clearly but speaking as if they were alone. "I promise to value your thoughts and honor your choices. To protect without smothering, support without controlling, love without possessing. I promise to see you, truly see you, every day for the rest of our lives. To never take your presence for granted or forget what a gift it is that you chose me." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "I promise to be your partner in all things, your champion in difficult times, and your safe place when the world feels overwhelming. And I promise to love you not just for who you are now, but for whoever you become as you continue growing and discovering yourself." Octavia had to blink back tears before she could speak her own vows. "Joel," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I promise to stand beside you through every challenge leadership brings. To remind you that you're allowed to be human, to have needs and wants and moments of weakness. I promise to challenge you when you're wrong, support you when you're right, and love you regardless of which it is." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I promise to trust you with my fears and my dreams, my best days and my worst moments, to build a life with you that honors both who we are individually and who we become together. And I promise to choose you, every day, for as long as we both shall live." Elder Thomas spoke the binding words then, the ancient phrases that sealed mate bonds in the sight of the moon and the pack. And when he finally said, "You may seal your bond," Joel pulled Octavia close and kissed her with a tenderness that made the small audience sigh with collective joy. The moment their lips met, Octavia felt something shift deep in her chest. A click of recognition, a sense of completion. The mate bond, solidifying into something tangible and permanent. She could feel Joel's emotions now, layered beneath her own. Overwhelming love, profound relief, fierce protectiveness, and joy so pure it made her eyes sting. When they broke apart, both slightly dazed, cheers erupted from their small audience. "I present," Elder Thomas said with a warm smile, "King Joel and Queen Octavia of Frostpeak." Queen. The title took Octavia by surprise. She hadn't thought about the fact that mating the Alpha King automatically conferred royal status. But looking at the approving faces around them, at the genuine happiness in the pack members' expressions, she realized it didn't matter. Title or no title, she was simply Octavia. And that was enough. Chapter 9. The weeks following the mating ceremony were the happiest of Octavia's life. She moved into Joel's quarters, their quarters now, and slowly made the space her own, adding books to the shelves, rearranging furniture to create better reading nooks, hanging curtains in colors she loved. Joel watched her nest with obvious delight, often commenting that the rooms had never felt like a true home until she arrived. They fell into comfortable patterns. Mornings usually meant joining Joel for breakfast before he attended council meetings or dealt with pack business. Octavia had started sitting in on some of those meetings at Joel's invitation, and though she mostly listened and observed, occasionally she'd offer perspectives that made the counselors reconsider their positions. "You see angles we miss," Lady Margot had told her after one particularly productive meeting, "because you're not entrenched in the way things have always been done. Your fresh perspective is valuable." Afternoons Octavia spent however she chose, reading, working in the gardens with Soren, or helping in the pack nursery where young pups gathered for care while their parents worked. She'd discovered she had a knack with children, a patience and gentleness that made even the shyest pups comfortable around her. Evenings belonged to them. Sometimes they'd walk the forest together, Joel showing her hidden corners of the territory and sharing stories about growing up in these woods. Sometimes they'd remain in their quarters, reading by the fire or talking about everything and nothing. And sometimes they'd simply hold each other, communicating through touch and the mate bond what words couldn't express. It was during one of those quiet evenings, about a month after the ceremony, that Joel brought up a subject that had been lingering unspoken between them. "Have you thought about reaching out to your family?" he asked gently. "I know things ended badly with Silver Creek, but surely your parents must wonder how you are." Octavia was quiet for a long moment, considering. She'd been avoiding thinking about her family, about the life she'd left behind. But Joel was right. Her parents deserved to know she was safe and happy. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid they'll be angry about the shame I brought to the family by refusing Marcus. Afraid they'll demand I return or try to make me feel guilty for choosing my own happiness." "And if they do?" Joel asked. "What then?" "Then I'll tell them no," Octavia said with growing confidence. "I'll tell them that I'm mated now, that I'm happy, that I'm building a life I actually want rather than one chosen for me. And if they can't accept that, if they choose anger over joy for my happiness, then that's their choice to make." Joel pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm so proud of you, of how much you've grown in just a few months." "I had help," Octavia said, smiling up at him. "From a king who taught me I was worth valuing." She did write to her parents eventually, a carefully worded letter explaining what had happened and where she was now. The response came 3 weeks later, stiff and formal, her father's handwriting expressing relief that she was safe, but disappointment in her choices. Her mother had added a postscript in her own hand. "I'm glad you found somewhere you're happy. You deserve that." It wasn't the warm reconciliation Octavia might have hoped for, but it was something. And more importantly, she discovered that she didn't need their approval anymore. She had built her own family here, had found her own place, had created her own worth independent of their validation. The change of seasons brought new responsibilities. As the mate of the Alpha King, Octavia was expected to take on certain roles within the pack. She helped Lady Margot coordinate the spring planting efforts, worked with the healers to organize a wellness program for elderly pack members, and started a reading circle for young Omegas who wanted education but had limited access. Every initiative she started, Joel supported fully. More than that, he valued her input on pack decisions, often asking her opinion before finalizing plans that would affect their wolves. "You see the individual impact," he explained one night when she asked why her thoughts mattered so much to him. "I tend to think in terms of efficiency and overall benefit. You think about how each wolf will experience the change. We balance each other, make better decisions together than either of us would alone." It was true, Octavia realized. They had become genuine partners, their strengths complementing each other's weaknesses, their different perspectives creating more nuanced solutions to complex problems. And through it all, the mate bond between them grew stronger, deeper, more intrinsic to who they were. Octavia could feel Joel's presence even when they were in different parts of the castle, could sense his emotions through the constant thread connecting them. When he was stressed, she'd know before he told her, would seek him out with tea and quiet comfort. When she was overwhelmed, he'd appear at her side with steady support and gentle reassurance. "This is what I dreamed of," Octavia said one evening as they stood in the pavilion overlooking the territory, the same place where they'd shared their first kiss months ago. Not the title or the castle or the status. This, partnership, being seen and valued and loved for exactly who I am. "And who are you?" Joel asked, echoing the question he'd posed so long ago in the library. Octavia thought about it, about how much she'd changed since that desperate wolf running through the snow. "I'm someone who's still figuring it out," she admitted. "But I'm brave enough now to explore, to make mistakes, to try new things without fear that failure means I'm worthless. I'm someone who values kindness and honesty and genuine connection. Someone who wants to help others find their worth the way you helped me find mine." She turned to look at Joel, at the man who had saved her life and then taught her how to actually live it. "I'm your mate," she continued, "your partner, your equal, and I'm finally, completely, genuinely myself. Whoever that is, whoever that becomes, I'm enough. Just by existing." Joel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "You're more than enough," he murmured. "You're everything. And I thank the moon every day that she led me into that forest, at exactly the right moment to find you." "I thank her too," Octavia said, "for the cold that drove me to run, for the storm that should have killed me, but instead led me exactly where I needed to be, for every painful moment that brought me to you." They stood in the pavilion as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, two wolves who had found each other against all odds, and built something beautiful from the wreckage of Octavia's broken past. "There's something I want to give you," Joel said, pulling back slightly and reaching into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." He produced a small velvet pouch and placed it in Octavia's hands. Inside was a pendant, delicate silver shaped like a crescent moon with a small blue stone at its center that matched Joel's eyes exactly. "This belonged to my mother," Joel explained softly. "My father gave it to her when they bonded, and she wore it every day until she died. It's been in a vault for 27 years because I was waiting to give it to the right person, to my mate." Octavia's hands trembled as she held the precious object. "Joel, I can't. This is too important, too meaningful, which is exactly why I want you to have it," he interrupted gently. "You're my mate, Octavia, my partner, my future, and I want you to carry a piece of my past with you. Want you to know that you're not just accepted into this family, you're cherished by it." He took the pendant and fastened it around her neck, and Octavia felt the weight of it settle against her collarbone, not heavy, but present. A reminder that she belonged here, that she was part of something bigger than herself. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the pendant reverently. "I'll treasure it always." As spring deepened into summer and summer mellowed into fall, life in Frost Peak continued its gentle rhythm. The territory prospered under Joel's leadership, and gradually Octavia's presence as his mate became simply normal rather than novelty. She no longer felt like a guest in the castle, but like an integral part of it. Pack members sought her out for advice or just friendly conversation. She mediated disputes with a fairness that earned respect. She laughed with the kitchen staff and debated philosophy with Elder Thomas and played with pups in the nursery. She had become, without even realizing the transition was happening, exactly what Joel had promised she could be. Herself, valued and loved for existing. It was early autumn, nearly 8 months after their mating ceremony, when the final piece of Octavia's past resolved itself. A messenger arrived from Shadowfang territory carrying a formal letter. Joel read it first, his expression carefully neutral, before handing it to Octavia. The letter was from Marcus himself, and as Octavia read it, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. "King Joel and Queen Octavia, I write to formally withdraw any grievances regarding the broken alliance and to offer my genuine congratulations on your bonding. I have spent these past months examining my own behavior and recognizing the harm I caused through my selfishness and pride. Octavia, you deserved better than what I offered you. You deserved to be valued and chosen and loved, and I failed to provide any of that. I'm grateful that you had the courage to refuse a future that would have made us both miserable, even though I couldn't see it at the time. I've found my own path forward now. The woman I loved has agreed to bond with me, and my father has stepped back from leadership, allowing me to make changes in how Shadowfang operates. I'm trying to build something better, something kinder. I don't ask for forgiveness, as I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that your choice, the choice I resented so deeply, taught me something essential. That wolves aren't possessions. That genuine partnership requires mutual respect and care. That sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let someone go. I wish you both every happiness. May your bond be strong and your love enduring. Marcus Shadowfang." Octavia read the letter twice, processing the words and the growth they represented. This wasn't the Marcus who had humiliated her at the altar or sent envoys demanding her return. This was someone who had done the difficult work of examining himself and choosing to change. "How do you feel?" Joel asked quietly, watching her face. "Relieved," Octavia said slowly, "and genuinely happy for him. If he's found love and is building something better, that's good. That's what everyone deserves, the chance to grow and choose differently." She folded the letter carefully. "I don't forgive him for the pain he caused, but I also don't hate him anymore. Mostly I feel grateful, because his rejection, as painful as it was, led me exactly where I needed to be." "And where is that?" Joel asked with a slight smile, though she could feel through their bond that he already knew the answer. "Here," Octavia said simply, "with you. Building a life I actually want rather than one chosen for me." growing into who I'm meant to be with someone who celebrates that growth, rather than trying to contain it. She moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest and listening to his steady heartbeat. I'm not the same wolf you found dying in the snow, she continued. That Octavia was broken and desperate and convinced she had no worth. But you helped me become someone stronger. Someone who knows her value isn't determined by others' opinions. Someone who can stand on her own even while choosing to stand beside you. You were always that person. Joel corrected gently. I just helped you see what was already there. They stood together in comfortable silence, and Octavia reflected on how far she'd come. From running through a winter storm with no hope left, to standing in a castle that felt like home, surrounded by wolves who genuinely cared about her, bonded to a mate who valued every part of who she was. I want to write back to him, Octavia said suddenly. To Marcus. Nothing long or elaborate, just acknowledgement, closure for both of us. Whatever you need, Joel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I trust your judgment completely. Later that evening, Octavia sat at the desk in their quarters and carefully composed her response. Marcus, thank you for your letter and your honesty. I accept your acknowledgement of past harm, and I'm genuinely glad you found your own path to happiness. You're right that we would have made each other miserable. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit when something isn't working and choose differently, even when that choice is painful. I wish you well in your leadership and in your bond. May you build the kind of partnership you mentioned, one based on mutual respect and genuine care. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. And I hope you are too. Octavia, Queen of Frost Peak. She sealed the letter and sent it with a messenger the next morning, and with it, felt the last lingering threads of her old life finally release their hold. She was free, truly, completely free. Not running from something anymore, but running toward the future she was actively creating. Chapter 10, Epilogue. 2 years later. The winter garden was more beautiful than ever, transformed by decorations celebrating the season's first snowfall. Octavia walked the familiar path slowly, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their first pup grew strong and active. She paused before her favorite ice sculpture, the two wolves intertwined in mutual support, and smiled at the memory of when Joel had first shown her this garden. How terrified she'd been then. How uncertain of everything, including her own worth. That Octavia felt like a different person entirely. There you are, Joel's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. I should have known you'd be here. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, one large hand covering hers where it rested on their unborn child. Through their bond, she felt his wonder at the life they'd created, his anticipation of meeting their pup in just a few weeks. I was thinking about the first time you brought me here, Octavia said, leaning back into his warmth. About how much has changed since then. Everything has changed, Joel said. And yet somehow, everything feels like it was always meant to be this way. It was true. In the 2 years since their mating, Octavia had grown into her role as queen with a natural grace that surprised even her. She'd established programs to help Omegas access education and training they'd been traditionally denied. She'd created support systems for wolves struggling with rejection or family difficulties, drawing on her own experiences to help others navigate similar pain. She'd become not just the Alpha King's mate, but a leader in her own right, respected for her wisdom, valued for her compassion, loved for her genuine care about every member of the pack. Mira said the nursery is finally finished, Joel said, his voice carrying excitement barely restrained. She's been working on it for weeks, insisting everything needed to be perfect. Everything Mira does is perfect, Octavia said with a laugh. She's going to spoil this pup absolutely rotten, as is her right as honorary aunt, Joel replied solemnly. Along with Theron, who has already commissioned a miniature training sword despite my explicit instructions that weapons are not appropriate gifts for newborns. Octavia laughed harder at that, the sound carrying through the garden like music. 2 years ago, she'd forgotten what genuine laughter felt like. Now it came easily, naturally, a reflection of the joy that had become her normal state. I never thought I'd have this, she admitted quietly. A mate who loves me, a home where I belong, a child on the way, purpose and meaning and genuine happiness. When I was running through that storm, I couldn't imagine any future at all, let alone one this beautiful. Joel turned her gently in his arms so they faced each other. And I never thought I'd find someone who saw me as more than just my responsibilities, who challenged me and supported me and reminded me daily that I'm allowed to be happy. He cupped her face in both hands, his ice blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "You saved me too, Octavia," he said softly. "I was drowning in duty and loneliness, going through motions without ever really living. And then you appeared, this brave, broken, beautiful wolf who showed me what it meant to choose joy over obligation, to value individual happiness over tradition, to lead with both strength and compassion." "We saved each other," Octavia corrected. "That's what true mates do." They stood together in the garden as snow began falling softly around them, transforming the landscape into something magical. And Octavia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and rejection, the desperate flight, the freezing cold that should have ended everything. She thought about the moment Joel had found her, had spoken those words that changed everything. "I invoke the Sacred Refuge. You are mine to protect now." And she thought about everything that had followed, the healing and growing, the falling in love and choosing each other, the building of a partnership that made them both stronger. "What are you thinking?" Joel asked, reading something in her expression. "I'm thinking about destiny," Octavia said. "About whether everything really does happen for a reason. About whether the moon really does guide us toward where we need to be." "And what have you concluded?" Octavia smiled, touching the pendant she never removed, Joel's mother's crescent moon that had become her most treasured possession. "I think that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all. That pain doesn't always have purpose and suffering isn't always meaningful," she said slowly. "But I also think that how we respond to those terrible things matters. That we can take pain and transform it into growth. That we can choose, even in our darkest moments, to keep searching for light." She placed her hand over Joel's heart, feeling its steady rhythm beneath her palm. "You were my light," she continued. "The one who appeared when I had nothing left. And maybe that was the moon's design, or maybe it was simply chance. But either way, what we built from that moment, this love, this partnership, this life, that's what matters. Not why the pain happened, but what we created despite it." Joel pulled her close, careful of her belly, and held her with a tenderness that still made her eyes sting with happy tears. "I love you," he said simply, "for who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. For every day you choose me. For the family we're building and the future we're creating together." "I love you too," Octavia replied. "My mate, my king, my home." They remained in the garden until full dark, talking about names for their coming pup and making plans for the future. And when they finally walked back to the castle, hands linked and hearts aligned, Octavia looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky and sent silent gratitude to the moon. "Thank you for the cold that drove me to run. Thank you for the storm that should have killed me. Thank you for the Alpha King who found me when I'd given up. Thank you for teaching me that being abandoned wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something better than I'd ever dared to imagine." She was no longer the rejected bride left in the cold. She was Octavia, Queen of Frostpeak, beloved maid of the Alpha King, soon-to-be mother, leader in her own right, and finally, after so many years of searching, exactly where she belonged. The cold had nearly taken everything from her, but it had also led her home. The end. Thank you for joining Octavia and Joel on their journey from abandonment to belonging, from cold rejection to warm acceptance, from doubt to unwavering love. This story holds a special place in my heart because it's about discovering your own worth when the world has told you you're worthless. It's about finding home in unexpected places and learning that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Octavia's journey from that frozen forest to becoming a confident queen mirrors something I think many of us experience: the slow, difficult process of learning that we deserve kindness, respect, and genuine love, not because of what we provide others, but simply because we exist. And Joel, this lonely king who created art from ice and walked forests at night, represents the truth that even the strongest among us need connection, partnership, and someone who sees us as more than our responsibilities. Now, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment between Octavia? Your feedback shapes what I create next. Every comment, every thought you share, helps me understand what resonates with you and what stories you're hungry to experience. If this story touched your heart, made you believe in second chances, or reminded you of your own inherent worth, please let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to support this channel and see more original romance stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Remember, like Octavia, you are worthy of love simply for existing. Never settle for someone who makes you feel like you need to earn basic respect and care. Until next time, may you find your own version of home, whether that's a person, a place, or simply peace within yourself. With love and gratitude, Maggie Reed.